of development assistance. All of this will continue because global challenges, they require cooperation with the United Nations as a cornerstone. And the challenges we have are many and urgent. The climate crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, threats to democracy and human rights, and Russia's aggression against Ukraine and its devastating effects. So the UN is more relevant than ever as we respond to these global emergencies and challenges. And today we have discussed Russia's brutal aggression against Ukraine and the security situation in Europe. We also discussed the devastating humanitarian situation in Ukraine, and the UN plays an important role in peace and security and in supporting humanitarian efforts. And Sweden will continue to pressure on Russia and to be a strong supporter of Ukraine. Russia's invasion is an unjustified and clear violation of international law, and we are witnessing shocking brutality and attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure. And Russia must be held accountable for its action, and I'm grateful for the Secretary General's clear stance on this. We have also discussed climate change and the need to speed up green transition, and Sweden is at the forefront here. What we see in Sweden right now is a green industrial revolution, which in turn is creating thousands of new jobs through investments in battery factories, green mining, and fossil-free steel production. And I think we need to be better at showcasing that emissions reductions can go hand in hand with economic growth, jobs, and prosperity for our citizens. Tomorrow, the world is gathering here in Stockholm. It is a historic moment. 50 years ago, Sweden's then Prime Minister Olof Palme made climate and environmental issues world policy. And the 1972 UN Stockholm Conference led to the birth of a global responsibility for climate, for the environment, and sustainability. And it was also the birth of the UN Environment Programme and global agendas such as the Paris Agreement. And by the end of this week, we hope to make history again. The time for action is now. And governments, the private sector, civilian society, and the youth movement have all gathered here in Stockholm to find ways to speed up the green transition. And we are all important actors in this endeavor. And Sweden is hosting the Stockholm Plus 50 in cooperation with Kenya and the United Nations. And its outcome will be an important part of the continued global efforts to reduce emissions, halt biodiversity loss, and stop ocean pollution. Thank you.
Prime Minister Andersson, thank you so very much for your warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, good afternoon. I want to thank the government and the people of Sweden for your steadfast support of the United Nations and multilateralism through the years. Sweden stands out as a trailblazer for gender equality, a champion of climate action and sustainable development, a staunch defender of human rights and international law, a pioneer in the mediation and prevention of conflicts, and a critical and much-needed partner in humanitarian action and development assistance. I am here for the Stockholm Plus 50 conference, a crucial opportunity to bolster our response to the triple planetary emergency of climate disruption, pollution, and biodiversity. As the late great Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme said at the time, and I quote, "In the field of human environment, there is no individual future, neither for human beings nor for nations. Our future is common. We must share it together. We must shape it together." End of quote. I believe his insight has even greater relevance today across the spectrum of our many global challenges, from the climate emergency to the COVID-19 pandemic to the war in Ukraine. On the war, the position of the United Nations is clear since the very beginning. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is a violation of its territorial integrity and a violation of UN Charter. The war must end now. It is causing immense suffering, destruction, and devastation of the country. But it also inflames a three-dimensional global crisis in food, energy, and finance that is pummeling the most vulnerable people, countries, and economies. I saw this for myself during my recent visit to the Sahel, where countries were already confronting an escalating climate crisis, drowning in debt, and struggling with economic insecurity heightened by the pandemic. Now, they also face ballooning energy costs and growing hunger. A perfect storm is threatening to devastate the economies of many developing countries. They need support. Unfortunately, there are recent indications that some countries are considering deep cuts to official development assistance, a reversal of prior commitments. This is alarming, and I urge countries to reconsider, given the dire consequences these cuts will have on the lives of the most vulnerable. And I was very glad to hear the Prime Minister say that your commitment to official development assistance will be maintained. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, specifically with respect to the food crisis, we need quick and decisive action to ensure a steady flow of food and energy in open markets by lifting export restrictions, allocating surpluses and reserves to vulnerable populations, and addressing food price increases to calm market volatility. But let me be frank. There is no effective solution to the food crisis without reintegrating Ukraine's food production, as well as the food and fertilizer produced by Russia, into world markets despite the war. I continue to exert every possible effort and use my good offices to promote a dialogue towards this end. We have two UN teams, led by Martin Griffiths and Rebecca Greenspan, to help find a package deal involving the safe and secure export of Ukrainian-produced food through the Black Sea, with unimpeded access of Russian food and fertilizers to global markets, especially developing countries. As we speak, the two groups are visiting relevant capitals to facilitate in the search of commonly agreed solutions. At the same time, the United Nations remains intensely focused on practical steps to save lives and reduce human suffering within Ukraine, from effective humanitarian corridors to cessations of hostilities, and regionally through our refugee response. The Prime Minister and I discussed recent developments on the ground, the implications for European security, and possible pathways towards this escalation and a negotiated settlement in line with international law and the UN Charter. I expressed my gratitude for Sweden's remarkable solidarity in welcoming Ukrainian refugees and for providing vital support to our humanitarian operations. We also discussed other challenges, and first and foremost, the climate crisis. Sweden has shown how ambitious environmental action and climate targets can support job creation, generate green growth, and strengthen the health and well-being of society. I welcome Sweden's commitment to achieve net zero emissions by 2045 at the latest, and negative emissions shortly thereafter. And I count on the European Union to match this ambition and review its renewable energy and energy-efficient targets this year. But even the most ambitious actions to slash emissions this decade will not erase the fact that the situation is already bad, and in many cases and places, irreversibly so. That is why adaptation and mitigation must be pursued with equal urgency, and developing countries must receive the necessary support at speed and at scale. We need massive increases in investments to accelerate the transition to renewable energy economies, and we need to ensure more finance flows to developing countries in support of these efforts. This means we need financial actors, especially multilateral development banks, to align their actions with the Paris Agreement and to take more risk to unlock investments in developing countries. I count on all developed nations, including Sweden, to reassure developing countries with a clear and credible roadmap on how they will double finance for adaptation as agreed in Glasgow last year. But most importantly, we must uphold the Paris Agreement, keep the 1.5-degree goal alive, and rescue the Sustainable Development Goals. This will require greater solidarity, deeper cooperation, higher ambitions, more urgency, and stronger leadership, not tomorrow, but today. And we count on Sweden for that purpose. This is my message to all other member states at the outset of the Stockholm Plus 50 conference, and I thank you. Tack.
Thank you very much. Carl Ritter from the Associated Press. First question for the Secretary General regarding High Commissioner Bachelet's trip to China. What specifically, concretely, has been achieved through that trip? And do you feel that she's been able to get to do an independent, complete assessment of the human rights situation in China, particularly in Xinjiang? And will you support, or do you plan to ask her to serve as a second term as High Commissioner? And for the Prime Minister, I'm wondering if there's an update on the talks with Turkey regarding NATO membership. Turkey has presented a specific list of demands now, including Sweden's relations with the IPG, extraditions of people living in Sweden, and the Swedish weapons embargo on Turkey. Is Sweden willing and able to meet any of those demands, and if so, which? Thank you.
Well, I don't think this visit was an investigation visit, and it is obvious that in this visit it was impossible to have a clear picture of everything that is going on. But this visit was an opportunity to say very important things and to convey very important messages on the absolute need to respect human rights, and especially human rights in minorities, and namely in Xinjiang, to the Chinese authorities. And that, I think, is very important, especially doing that in China. And I have, of course, full confidence in the High Commissioner.
We have had discussions with and dialogue with Turkey, and this dialogue will continue going forward. And I'm looking forward to further constructive meetings together with Turkey in the near future. But our responses to demands and also questions from Turkey, we will take directly with Turkey, and also, of course, sort out any issues or misunderstandings that there might be.
Andreas Öbrink, Swedish Television. A question both to Mrs. Anderson and to Mr. Guterres. In what way is the war in Ukraine affecting this meeting and the talks you plan to have this meeting on climate change and environmental issues? And in what way is the war affecting the general fight on these topics? Is it getting harder to fight climate change now?
Well, obviously, when we have a dramatic situation with the dimension of this war that has no comparison with any other conflict in the last decades, there is inevitably a diversion of attention in relation to many other issues. And the sense of urgency in the debate on climate has, of course, suffered with the war in Ukraine. But I think this war has demonstrated one thing: how fragile is the world in its dependence to fossil fuels. And just look at the recent discussions that we have witnessed in the European Union. So it's time to learn the lesson. If we do not want again to be in the same situation we are today, we need to make a clear bet. Massive investment in renewable energy and clear understanding that the dependence on fossil fuels is a suicidal one.
I mean, what we have seen during the last years is that there are a number of crises in the world. We have the Russian aggressions in Ukraine. Before that, we had the pandemic, and ongoing and not waiting is the climate crisis. And of course, we have to be able to handle all these crises at the same time. And I think also we should learn the lessons, take away the lessons we've learned, for instance, during the pandemic, when the world came together to develop a vaccine and also helped each other to produce a vaccine, are helping each other to distribute the vaccine. More could be done in that area. But when we come together, work together, we can achieve fantastic things together. That's the lesson we should bring with us now when we are discussing climate change and the climate crisis. We have to work closer together, but we can achieve fantastic things. And here, of course, the experience we have in Sweden right now, seeing how climate change actually, or climate transition actually create new jobs. That's something gives hope for the future that we want to show the world.
Thank you. Niklas Svan from TT News Agency in Sweden. I would like to ask the Secretary General, the UN played an important role in the negotiations of people of Azovstal in the steelwork to get them out. Will the UN also play a role in getting them out of Russia? And secondly, getting people who fled from Azovstal out of Russia, will the UN play a role in those negotiations? And secondly, if I may, you talked about the food situation. Russia's President Vladimir Putin, he told French President Macron that Russia is ready to help to find options to get export of grain from the Black Sea out. What is the UN doing, and are you happy with the results that has been made?
First, in relation to the first question, the UN was directly involved, and to a certain extent, I believe I was in the origin of that operation, in the evacuation of civilians from Azovstal. The UN was not directly involved because it's not our area of competence in the evacuation of military from Azovstal. What we have been insisting is on the need to pursue as quickly as possible the exchange of prisoners in order for that problem to be solved in a definitive way. The second question. I have been talking very little about what we are doing. And my experience is that when we talk too much and do too little, you make things difficult to happen. So for the moment, we have not yet results. We are engaged in a serious dialogue, technically well prepared, with all the relevant parties, in order to find a package deal that will allow for Ukraine to be able to export safely and with security, without undermining its own security, their grain through the Black Sea, and at the same time for the world to have access without impediments to the Russian production of fertilizers and food that is also essential for global markets in the present situation. And let me remind you that there was a ban of exports until recently. I think that there is progress, but we are not yet there. These are very complex things, and the fact that everything is interlinked makes the negotiation particularly complex. But, as I said to the Security Council, I'm hopeful, but there is a way to go, and we are totally committed to make things happen. Recently, we had the announcement that all parties would agree to have, in relation to the Black Sea, a quadrilateral meeting between Russia, Ukraine, the UN, and Turkey to see how it will be possible to find a solution for that very complex situation in which there are serious security concerns to take into account.
Isak Krona from Swedish Radio here. I have a question for you, Mr. Secretary General, about climate aid.
Sorry?
About climate aid, climate funding for developing countries. A lot of reports point out the importance of economical aid to developing countries for mitigation and adaptation. I wonder what your standpoint is on that. How important is that? And also, you mentioned Sweden's ambition to double the climate aid until 2025. But this year, Sweden is actually cutting its climate aid by a third to afford to take refugees from Ukraine. What do you think about that? Is that the right priority?
Well, what I've been saying very clearly is that developed countries should have implemented their commitment to support the developing world with $100 billion per year since 2020. And unfortunately, that did not happen in 2020, that did not happen in 2021, that did not, until now, it's not yet clarified, it will happen in 2022, probably it will not happen in 2022. And this is one of the major facts that is creating a level of mistrust that, in my opinion, is a very serious impediment for us to be able collectively, in unity, North and South, to address climate change and to be able to keep the 1.5 degrees alive.
Thank you.